150,000 auto workers are prepping to launch what might be the biggest strike in decades tomorrow after their employer's refusal to provide sufficient pay and job security, according to the lever. Over the past year, the big three automakers, General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis, have authorized $5 billion in stock buybacks, quote, effectively giving billions of dollars to shareholders that could have gone to auto workers.
The big three have also reported $21 billion in profits in just the first 6 months of 2023. In a statement released last month, General Motors claimed that the United Auto Workers UAW's demands, quote, would threaten our ability to do what's right for the long-term benefit of the team. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders weighed in on the possible auto workers strike.
Leadership. The members of the UAW are fighting back. If the big three automakers, General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis, do not provide reasonable contracts to address long-standing inequities in the industry, there will be a strike. And all of us should support the strikers. The UAW members will be fighting not only for themselves, but against a corporate culture of arrogance, cruelty, and selfishness, which is causing massive and unnecessary pain for the majority of working families throughout our country.
So what's going on here? Fill me in.
We're at the precipice of what might be one of the biggest labor strikes in decades. The big three auto companies previously were in the situation where there was this labor turmoil in the 1980s that gets framed differently by different kinds of people. I listened to The Daily, in fact, the New York Times' report, daily podcast, and they gave a very unfavorable framing of what the unions are arguing for. They argue that because at a previous period of time of union power, they asked for too much of the automakers, causing them to flail as a business, have struggled with competition with foreign manufacturers, see a lapse in how much of the market they were able to capture. And only when labor was willing to back down and take less and take significant pay cuts in the 80s were the American car manufacturers able to have this resurgence. Laborers are telling a very different story, namely that there have been enormous profits because, yes, the car companies did finally figure out after the bailout how to compete in the market. Largely the shift to people valuing SUVs more empowered them to make a kind of car that was doing better in the market. And they've been seeing outsized profits since that time. The union is now saying, look, we're in a situation where we gave up a lot of stuff in the 80s. We're in a situation where the average worker pay has declined, adjusted for inflation, by 30% over the last 40 years, while the CEOs have given themselves a 40% pay raise. They have pointed out that they're under their profit sharing formula, they are just asking for $2 to workers for every $1 million that is spent by Ford on stock buybacks, special dividends, and increases to normal dividends. And when we're talking about stock buybacks, what's really clear, what we have to really make clear is that this is a situation where companies are making profit, and instead of investing in designing new kinds of cars, updating technology, making it more likely that the business is going to be able to compete competitively going forward, they're instead just giving the money out to shareholders who are doing nothing to contribute to the firm's value, just as an inducement, as just a payout.
Well, I mean, but the shareholders, they bought shares, so they contributed to the company so that in hopes of seeing an eventual profit, right?
And a board can decide whether or not, in order to keep your profit-generating goose profitable, you should invest in the business, as many small business owners recognize. If they ran a restaurant for a week, decided just to put all of the profits in their pockets, pay their workers the bare minimum, their business wouldn't be in business very long, right? Workers would choose to work at a different kind of restaurant. The quality of the food, the quality of the light fixtures, whatever it is required to actually make it an enjoyable experience for the customer would be diminished. And they might have short-term gain, but they would have long-term losses. And that's exactly what we're seeing over multiple industries, where there has been a choice. We saw this in the instance of the planes being grounded last Christmas, and that huge catastrophe that somehow has gotten memory hold. That part of the issue was that they hadn't updated the technology that is used for scheduling and planning these flights. So then there was a hiccup. When there was a hiccup, there was no real way to get things back on track. Similarly here, they're making a choice not to invest in the workforce, not to invest in the companies either, but to pay out in profit. And now they're claiming that the workers' demands are unreasonable, despite the fact that they could, I think one of the union leader tweeted out that you could give every worker a $40,000 pay raise and still have these incredibly huge profits that they've been enjoying. So it really isn't a matter of how much money there is and whether there's enough money to go around. It's a question of whether or not there's a choice being made to give that money that's, again, created through the toil of the laborers who are building these cars exclusively to the shareholder class.
Well, they have the right to strike and demand better payment. And if the bosses really think that, shutting down production for some period of time is, to allowing that happen is cheaper than just, making some compromise or agreement, then I guess that's what's going to happen. That seems unlikely to me. So they should probably offer something that the workers want and negotiate and have this not happen, because it would be very bad for the auto companies to have a strike at this time, just as strikes are not good for the owners either. So I don't know, what their thinking is, but it hasn't begun yet, right? It's set to happen.
It's set to begin perhaps tomorrow, and this is going to be a big proving ground for unions and their capacity to actually extract concessions. So it's believed that if this is a shorter term strike, if the union isn't able to hold out for a longer period of time, if it's just a 3-day or a week-long strike, that won't put enough pressure on the big three to actually feel like they need to take these demands seriously. It's a pain game, a game of chicken. Who can hold out the longest? Obviously, workers are at a disadvantage because, unlike the billionaire class that they're trying to get concessions from, they are relying on their paychecks to actually subsist and survive in the world. But it has really gotten to
getting back pay when the strike ends.
Yeah,
right?
if they're successful, but they're not always successful. So that's why people are really looking to this and paying a lot of attention to it, because this is one of the larger strikes that we've had, with 150,000 workers implicated, and one of the stronger unions. One of the things that's characterizing this particular effort and why the United Auto Workers is being more aggressive on behalf of its workers than it has been in the past is because instead of being trapped in a kind of business unionism, a lot of unions have been captured with leadership that is not ready, prepared to go on strike, is too conciliatory to the management class, is closer to management than the workers themselves, the union leaders. Instead of being captured with that kind of business unionism, this is one of the few unions that elected their leader in a democratic process. And it's because of the advocacy and the forcefulness, namely of Shawn Fain, that people believe that UAW workers have been able to get to this point. What's kind of interesting is the framing of Shawn Fain, who is the son of a union worker who walks around with his father's first pay stub in his wallet as a reminder of where he came from. The way that he was characterized in the Times report, I think yesterday, was they said he uses populist tactics. And they didn't mean populism in a good way. I think the implication was that he's a fiery rabble-rouser of the Trump variety that New York Times listeners should look at with skepticism. But I think he's really resonated with the workers because he's seen as someone who is uncompromised and is fighting for them unflinchingly and without having this kind of weird relationship with management that would cause him to make compromises that are not necessary to get the workers what they want.
Well, we'll have to see how that goes on. Obviously, the writer strike is ongoing right now, so there's a significant amount of people who are, in fact, on strike. Do you know anything updated about how that's going? It seems like it's just going to continue on for a long time.
It's a similar
I hope
game
the
of
auto
chicken.
workers make a bigger splash. I mean, I think I've said this before on the show. I think the writers are in a more difficult conundrum in that there is such a glut of available streaming content that it's going to be a long time before the broader public starts saying, just give them whatever they want, we need more TV, that kind of thing.
Well, it's the fall. It's in the fall when new programming would typically roll out. So the studio heads are feeling, I think, more pressure now than they perhaps have over the summer. And the question is, exactly how long people are going to be able to hold. I think it's very tough for writers. There are links that exist out in the world if people want to offer support, provide support for the writers and actors. But they are still holding very strong because they realize, I think, that this is an existential threat, though it is for so many workers across the country who are looking to the power of labor and looking to these kind of forceful statements of support from folks like Bernie Sanders, who are very clear about how historically labor gains have been been achieved. One thing that really needs to be highlighted, and I mentioned this briefly in another segment that we did, is that historically, when the United Auto Workers or other large unions have succeeded in raising their own standards of living, their own pay, and there's some other issues at play here outside of pay raises, but when they've been able to raise their own employment standards, the results of that have trickled down to the rest of the economy and the rest of the workforce, because they're not just competing with other car manufacturers for employees, but someone who might work at a car manufacturing company could work in any other kind of business. And so when those wages go up, it tends to drag wages up across the economy, which is why there is an argument that solidarity with workers is really important. Now, the media, the corporate liberal media and conservative media, will choose to characterize potential, like workers, we're all workers, as consumers first and foremost. And they'll say things like, well, this is going to drive up the cost of your car. This is going to prevent you when the railroad strike ends. This is going to prevent you from being able to get your Christmas gifts on time because the trains won't be running, things like that.
Because we are all consumers, not all workers in a specific industry.
We're not all consumers any more than we're all workers. But the overwhelming
everybody
majority.
buys from Amazon. Not everyone works at Amazon.
No,
everybody
but
buys a car. Not everyone works for a car company.
First of all, Robbie, literally everybody does not drive a car. I literally cannot drive. So this is a ridiculous. This is. Come on, Robbie.
Okay, there are a lot more people who buy cars than work.
Literally everybody works, Robbie. Who doesn't work?
Who works for a car company?
The point that I literally just finished making, Robbie, was that it drags up wages for everybody, not just people who work at this little car company. That's the point I just finished making.
So trickle-down works in this instance?
It's not trickle-down. It's the fact that there's a labor market. We just did a segment where a housing tycoon was arguing that we need to create more unemployment so he doesn't have to pay his workers as much money.
I don't want to create more unemployment. I want to create less unemployment.
To have a loose labor market where employees
I don't know what he was saying. I don't even know who that guy is.
Where employees, it's not about him. It's about the theory of the case, which has been repeated by Larry Summers and any number of people who participate in this kind of conservative economic thinking. It is true that when there's a tight labor market, it's good for workers and bad for businesses, business owners, bad for CEOs. So that's the argument here. They want it to be the case where there aren't competitive wages happening everywhere, because then they keep having to raise their wages to attract good workers. That's obviously good for workers, and it's obviously bad for these CEOs. So that's the point that I'm making, that labor solidarity asks people to remember that they are laborers too, and that the gains of the people in these unions ends up reflecting on them and their workplaces as well.
Like I said, they have every right to strike and ask for whatever they think they're entitled to, and that's what's going to happen. And I have no problem. I get portrayed as like I'm anti-labor in the public sector union context. Private sector unions, you have a right to organize, and you can ask whatever you want of your employer.
Well, what's so interesting in this case is that, I mean, the auto workers, GM, their response to all of this is that we don't have enough money to do this. We just simply don't have enough money to pay people out. General Motors specifically, in a statement released last month, said it would threaten our ability to do what's right for the long-term benefit of the team. And I think that strikes a lot of folks as really rich, given that all of the stock buybacks rather, are exactly what's threatened the integrity of the business in years past, not paying laborers who are actually building your cars. The big three have reported $21 billion in profit in just the first 6 months.
And I don't have any love for them. They took a bailout. They're rent seekers. They should pay back their profits to the taxpayers first and foremost of all. I would have never taken that decision. I would have let them all go bankrupt if that was what needed to happen. And so I have no love for companies that are on the public dole and then use that money to just pay out their CEO or their shareholders or whoever.
Yeah.
So it's not out of loyalty or.
Yeah, and the workers are just earning so much less now in inflation-adjusted dollars than they were 30, 40 years ago. And while the CEOs are giving them sort of a 40% pay raise, I mean, it flies in the face of anything rational. And the idea that they're still using the excuse that they just can't afford it. It would be more honest to say, I just don't want to do it. I just don't want to do it, because that's what they're up against. It was similar in the railroad instance. What they were asking for was so minimal. I mean, just one vacation day off. That the media that largely sides with management in these kind of scenarios was having a really tough time selling the idea that these railroad workers were just lazy bums or avocado toast eating slackers that brought whatever economic hardship they were experiencing on themselves. And so I similarly think that these auto workers are in a really good position, both in terms of how they're positioned with respect to the media, the value of their claims, the clear evidence they've pointed to about how much wealth has been extracted from them over the years despite their work leading to the enormous profitability of this business. And I'm really excited to see what happens over the next few weeks.
You have kind of an avocado color to your jacket today, Briahna.
And yet it is not the cause of widespread unemployment.
How about that? That does it for us for today. Tomorrow on Rising, we're actually both going to be off. We both decided to take days off. So we'll have Jessica Burbank holding down the fort with beloved Rising guests.
Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who prefer to listen while you're on the go, you can find us anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Bye-bye.
Bye.